everyone. Welcome back to Medicine for These Times. I have Elizabeth J.O with us here. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Beth. I'm excited to be here today.
It's so good to have you, and it's so good to meet the other half of Alter States Integration. We were just talking about your event and party that I missed at Psychedelic Science because I was in my tiny little hotel room, sick. But let's get into it. I'll tell the audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll start on the questions. So Elizabeth is a holistic dietitian, nutritionist, and change coach with 15 years of clinical experience. Since graduating from Bastyr University, she has studied coaching, human behavior, psychology, yoga, flow states, and mindfulness-based therapies. In her free time, she offers peer support in online forums and volunteers at festivals, providing psychedelic harm reduction with Nest, Zendo Project, Fireside Project, Rest Pit, and Sanctuary. Elizabeth co-founded Altered States Integration in 2012 to reduce the barriers accessing integration services. She is a director at Psychedelic Society of Texas and organizes their online chapter. She also has authored Breaking Emotional Addiction, Neurohacking BPD with Ibogaine, detailing her personal healing journey. Elizabeth is passionate about reducing barriers to finding compassionate support for processing non-ordinary states of consciousness, and she's currently studying coaching at Lumia. So, Elizabeth, I want to hear all about your background. How did you get to this place of where you're at now, getting into harm reduction, dietitian, even a book, which I really want to hear about this, Neurohacking BDP with Ibogaine. But what brought you to this place? And, was it your upbringing and the path that you were on, when you were younger?
Yeah, this path actually for me did start very young. When I was 13, I actually stole my first herbal medicine book from the library. And later on, when my mom found it, we returned it. So that was a lesson in and of itself. But I had a strong affinity towards plants and nature. Both of my grandmothers are nurses, and that runs in my family. And both of my grandfathers were farmers. And so I think that kind of being in this natural medicine space came rather early for me. I went to Bastyr University for dietetics to become a dietitian, but that was because I felt my mom on my shoulder telling me to do something practical, right? Do something that you can get a job at. And while I was there, I really wanted to do the herbal science, and so I pushed myself, and I actually graduated with a double major and a minor um, in herbal science, nutrition, and then the minor in dietetics. So I entered the field of dietetics, and very quickly I already knew that I didn't really want to work in mainstream modern medicine. Bastyr is this bubble of naturopaths and Chinese medicine practitioners and, people who are into like maybe a more holistic way of viewing health. And so I started out in an acute care hospital just to get the run of the land. You got to know what you don't know. Um, and as I was there, I decided that I would take a first travel job. And that was over 15 years ago. And I was probably one of the first people in my field to be a traveling medical worker as a dietitian. And I have been all over the country and all over the world. I think that an important part to add in is that I've been a sufferer of BPD since I was a teenager. And I think the entire time, while I wanted to be a healer for other people, that compassionate part of me has always been alive. Is that I really was doing all these different modalities and seeking out all these different interests to heal myself, to really see how I could change, because I knew from a very young age that my experience of the world was not healthy and not okay, and that I didn't want to continue being that way. And psychedelics, as a teenager for fun a little bit, but not really. I was really careful because I also knew my mental health was like a little shaky, and I was like, oh, what if I lose my mind, right? This is like the 90s, and we all thought that we would jump out windows or lose our mind completely. So a few years ago, about 2018, I was really struggling with my mental health and where I was in my life in my 30s and thinking, hey, like, how do I connect? How do I like get a partner? How do I like make my dreams come true if I'm always struggling with this suicidality and these emotions that are bigger than I am? And um, trying to build relationships. And so I came honestly to a place of desperation and did Iboga. I ordered it off the internet. I did an DIY experience. Um, and I really got the miracle. But I know that that wasn't an accident either. Because at the time I was taking Jamie Wheel's Flow Fundamentals course, and I was trying to figure out how to hack my entrepreneurship and how I could get up every day and be my best self. And at the same time, I was taking a online DBT course that's dialectical behavioral therapy, and that was teaching me skills like distress tolerance and mindfulness and interpersonal relationship. And so when I had this experience with Iboga, this life review happened, and I had an entire quest journey. And at the end of it, I had to really unlock all of these memories. And the way I unlocked them was by undoing them, by changing what was there and changing my perspective, but also changing my outcome in each one of my memories through my life review that I had. And it was really profound. And afterwards, I decided that I wanted to do something that could help other people heal, because when you get the miracle, you want people at least to have a taste of it and you know that it's possible.
I think you might be the first person I've ever met that's given themselves iboga. Just kind of like self heal. And I think that's amazing. And especially with, along with all these complementary modalities. And, it's, I'm sure you know more about this than I even know, but they talk about borderline personality disorder to be like not complementary to psychedelics. There's a lot of arguments over if this is going to make people worse. And by the way, I am definitely one of those people. My whole teenage years, as I was doing a lot of drugs, I thought I would definitely be one of those people that would like turn schizophrenic and lose it all and like go the opposite direction, because just all so much trauma and so much instability to begin with. But back then it was just like numbing. The numbing was really helpful. But this is really incredible. So how did then this turn into coming up with altered states integration, harm reduction? Like, what brought you to this place of, yeah, obviously wanting to help people, but we're not all going to, let's say, festivals doing iboga, at least I hope not, but hey, who am I to judge? um but like, I'm curious, like, what then brought you to the harm reduction world?
So I actually was already in the harm reduction world. When I first graduated from Bastyr with my degree, I found out that I liked festivals. I'd never really been. And I found out that a lot of them I could go for free if I volunteered with the medical group, which I was qualified to do with my background. And through that experience, I found out about the Zendo project and decided that I would rather do this more helpful mental health role in mental health crisis support than I would putting band-aids on people's blisters, which is the most common thing you do at festivals. I was already in that space, and I think that that's honestly what inspired me to do iboga, because I wouldn't have known about it otherwise. And I had a lot of understanding at that point of set and setting. So when I had this experience with iboga, it was composed, it was planned, it was I had a sitter, it was thought out. There was a time frame of contemplation between having the substance and doing the substance. There was a lot of different precautions that we put in place for that situation. And I'd seen kind of the magic, and I'd heard all these different tales. And I think there was a lot of caution coming in, because I'd also sat for people who were in having the worst days of their life when they come into the Zendo. That's oftentimes the worst day someone has ever had when we see them, and seeing how they can turn that around, or how those life lessons manifest. And then I started reading research. I learned how to read journal articles in college, and I just started going on PubMed and looking things up about the different resources that were out there. And in 2017, 2018 was not great. Not like it is today, where we have, probably double or triple the resources to make these decisions.
Wow. This story is just so fascinating to me. I mean, it's really incredible. I'm curious, as someone who teaches integration and talks about it, and I'm sure you get a lot of, or know a lot of facilitators and people that hold space, what are your views on working with things, iboga or not, let's say psilocybin, right? What are your views on people who are like, quote, not trained, but they're holding space, that you do a certain amount of research and you're holding space for someone who really wants to take healing into their own hands. Maybe they can't get up and, I don't know, go to Jamaica and do a $7,000 retreat because of their treatment resistant depression, but they have, X grams of mushrooms that they want to take. What are your views on that? Because I've actually been having this discussion a lot lately where, there's of course people saying, well, you can only work with a skilled facilitator. And then there's people that remind me that there's, indigenous cultures have been working with these medicines for thousands of years without any training, and how do we get this right? What are your views on this? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that we're actually in a really great place for people to become psychedelic professionals of one form or fashion. And I think that there's a range of what people can do with a DIY education, right? So, my education is not directly psychedelic. I have a plant medicine background, I have a biochemistry background through nutrition, I have, you know, a background as a yoga teacher. So I've done meditation training. I have done Zendo training. So there's a lot of different pieces that I've put together to kind of hold space for people for integration and, for doing crisis support in psychedelics. I think while we don't have to have formal training, and formal training is one option, I think is a great option for people coming in with no background, right? If you have no background, you need to build skills. And that can look like doing first aid at minimum. Like you should know first aid, you should know CPR if you're going to work in any sort of healthcare. This is healthcare. You can do wilderness first aid, which is a woofer through Knowles, which will give you better ideas of what hypothermia looks like in somebody that you would be working with. I think that the scary part is that there's people coming in who have very little medical skills to start with, and they also have very little experience with psychedelics. And you put that together, and I think that that's the recipe for harm to happen, right? So we're trying to be harm reductionists or risk reductionists, and we're trying to reduce the chance of harm. And sometimes that can happen whether we like it or not, but how do we deal with the fallout? I think that's why there's such an attraction to doing harm reduction at festivals right now, is because how else are people supposed to get exposure to difficult psychedelic experiences without it being in front of them as their client, as their problem straight off? Because that's scary that the first time that you ever have a difficult psychedelic experience in front of you is by yourself as a sitter when you've only done it a few times. So I think that that's where, for me, the pendulum is never on one end or the other. I think our programs like Vital that are out there are really comprehensive. And at the same time, I don't think that that's also educationally accessible to a lot of people. In the future, hopefully we'll have spiritual guides, but they're also going to know CPR, and they're also going to have some reflective listening training, and they're also going to have some psychedelic first aid training. So I think it's about building the pieces that are gaps in your education to making you a well-rounded individual.
Mm. I really love this point of view, especially with, kind of like, I always see it as like the basic foundational pieces, whether you're experienced for 30 something years or somewhat new and you just want to start holding space for your friends. I always agree. It's like, well, a proper medical intake, a proper understanding of people's backgrounds, and a proper, maybe some kind of like CPR, like the very basics. To me, that's where there's like, okay, basic harm reduction. But then, yeah, maybe not having to go through a 3-year, $32,000, psychedelic facilitator training, which, I don't, which I found recently. I didn't know this existed until the other day. And I was like, well, okay, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I don't know if this is moving the psychedelic healing forward that so many want. The demand is so high. There's and more people like you just taking it into their own hands. Like, oh, I don't even need a sitter. Let me just take a bunch of 4 or 5 grams on my own and hope that everything's okay. I wouldn't do that, by the way, but I know people who do.
I did
Um,
have a sitter, just so you know. I
yeah,
did have
yeah,
a sitter.
that's great.
And I did have
Yeah,
somebody who was trained in harm reduction who could make
perfect.
some of those educational calls. So I did make sure to have that support. And I think that's where scope of practice comes in, is understanding what your scope of ability is and understanding when somebody comes to you as a sitter that is outside of your scope, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody is not able to maintain daily activities of living, which we talk a lot about in medicine, then that's the line where they really do need that much safer container where they have medical personnel that can help them and progress them through the experience and follow them afterwards. But I think that, we have to kind of be honest about our skill set. And I think that that's where my fear is, and probably what you see is where
Mm-hmm.
we have people who have maybe done psychedelics once or twice. They had an amazing experience. They've never even had a bad experience, so that's not even on their radar. And then how do they know how to deal with somebody who is going to have a bad experience in their presence and what they might do about that? Um, you know, I don't know that the fireside hotline's a great backup plan.
I know. I actually end up preaching this all the time. Like, know your own personal boundaries, get your ego in check, like be honest with yourself. If you do a proper intake and there's a red flag that says, "Oh, I have this condition," and you don't know anything about that, then be resourced, or maybe, send this person out to one of your other resources. I mean, even me as a coach, I have this whole list of resources where it's like, okay, when we're getting to something that I either, like maybe I know a fair amount about, but it's not my zone of genius, like I will send them to, my somatic therapist friend or someone to help with a certain kind of trauma processing where it's just not in the scope that I offer. And I think this is where, and I've had so many conversations over the years about facilitators and people holding space and underground or above ground to really be honest with themselves and get their ego in check. But the irony here is there's a lot of people that are just like gung-ho and excited, and like you said, they might have that one experience. It's like, I want to give this to everybody, but maybe they haven't even been put through that ringer themselves, which I always wonder. I'm like, how is that possible? Because for me, I'm always put through the ringer. But what are some issues you're seeing? Because you're based in Colorado, right?
I
Generally,
mean, generally, I'm
kind of.
based out of Colorado or Texas, but generally on the road.
Yeah, and Colorado has this. It's like this epicenter all of a sudden. Ever since the proposition passed in November, and now psychedelic science, and with legal cannabis, and now legal plant medicines. What are some kind of red flags that you've been seeing out there, and for people to either watch out for, or people just to keep in check? Like, I know we just talked about know your limitations and boundaries, but do you have any concerns about where this kind of psychedelic healing space is going, and how it might all play out? Because I've personally, even just being in Colorado for 9 days, it felt different than what I'm used to where I live. Like the energy was so different that there was just so much gung ho excitement. But yeah, do you have any concerns for the psychedelic space right now, where it's going?
Absolutely, especially here in Colorado, it is the Wild West. You have people who are making products that are not properly testing them. They may not even be following like DSHEA laws. DSHEA is the laws that supplement companies have to follow in order to make statements, medical statements, and claims about their products. It's standards of purity are not there. People are not doing COAs to test their substances, whether that be microdose chocolate bars or Amanita. For all you know, you could be taking sawdust that's in a pill. This is like very like 1920s when all these like FDA laws were made. I think that that's rarely where, especially as my education in nutrition comes from, is that I see this as like a reoccurrence of problems that we've had in the past, as far as the way that we market these things in kind of this unregulated free market. So I think that there's a lot that consumers can do, and a lot of the education that we're trying to do is around people asking the right questions, whether that be asking for a COA for the products that you're getting, asking people where their sources of medicine come from, especially outside of the psilocybin world. We're talking about plants that could become endangered, that come from indigenous regions. Really finding the right questions to ask. If your guide or your sitter isn't asking you about your medical history, you should be asking them why they're not asking about your medical history, and coming up with some criteria to be a smarter consumer. And I think that we know that with cars, we know to kick the tires, but we don't know how to kick the proverbial tires of a mushroom or of a capsule that we're being given.
Oh, I'm so glad you have this viewpoint from a dietitian, and you definitely know more about these and the labeling and the testing than probably the average person. But it is funny because that's kind of the sense I got. I've told a few people this story how I was in the what I call the trade show area of psychedelic science, and someone was selling, legal herbal, I don't know, some kind of herbal product, but it had they were selling like kava and kana, right? Do you know this? And I said to them, I was like, well, do you know if there's any contraindications with, let's say, ayahuasca or MDMA? And the girl that was selling them looked at me with this like blank stare. And I was like, whoa. Because I actually had a very not pleasant experience many, 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 many years ago with an herbal medicine that I was taking before ayahuasca that no one had informed me it was actually a contraindication. And it was very, very unpleasant. That could eventually have led to death. And I just found it to be really interesting that there's not even, mind you, like maybe no testing, but even education about how this might be affecting the other drugs that everybody's taking. If people are taking MDMA or ketamine or ayahuasca or even the ibogas, ibogaines of the world. So that was quite interesting. Now, with the work that you do with altered states integration, I want to talk a little bit about that. Do you guys end up working with a lot of people doing underground facilitation, or is it more just people that come to you to be in integration circles or integration coaches? Like, who is altered states integration really serving mostly?
Yeah, so we are serving a wide range of clients. We have just started opening up into more of the mentorship and support space for people who are facilitators. We do have a quarterly group for support for facilitators. Now, I think that that's going to take a little while to get going because facilitators, one, aren't used to reaching out and being in a safe space for themselves. They're used to being very isolated, and that's why we're providing the service. As for clients who are taking psychedelics, we do offer a wide range. We do safety assessments for people. We're not here to give advice, but we are to make sure that people are following some good guidelines that they've set together themselves, and we ask them good questions so that they can make some answers to be safer. We also do a lot of integration with people who are doing ketamine therapy. I find it really interesting how much ketamine is really not supportive of people. And as somebody in the medical field, I can imagine the scenario of you have Joe Smith, and Joe Smith was told that he needed to go to do ketamine therapy from his doctor. And Joe Smith lives in Tyler, Texas, and then he's going to, go down the road. He's going to get dropped off at the ketamine clinic. His wife's going to come pick him up later. He's going to do this thing that he doesn't really understand. He has a transformative or transpersonal experience that he doesn't really understand. As he comes to, everybody acts as if nothing happened, so he acts as if nothing happened, and then he goes home. And then he goes onto the internet and looks up ketamine and finds out that it's psychedelic and that he had an experience that nobody told him or really clearly helped him understand. And so we end up with this archetype coming into our circles who they're like, yeah, I came here because I did ketamine and I'm like not sure what's up. And so we see a lot of people like that. We find a lot of people who are doing DIY healing, who are trying to be more intentional about their experiences, people both from new to the space and people who have been doing psychedelics for years recreationally and are now, maybe they had a bad experience and they come into our space. So, integration is for a wide range of people, and we try and provide different types of circles for different types of experiences. Whether, we take on hard topics and we tell people, some of this is going to be triggering if you've had some difficulty. People are going to talk about trauma in here, and you need to take care of yourself.
Mm. Wow, and by the way, this is this is like the third story in a row I've heard about ketamine, because I actually don't really work with ketamine. I haven't worked with it in many, many years, and I don't really have that many clients working in the ketamine world. But I have now heard numerous stories about people doing ketamine not getting any support at all. Like literally, it's not even ketamine therapy. It's just getting ketamine from a provider. I don't really understand how that works without the therapy. And then people have like no integration support. And like you said, these can be really life changing, even if it's like, people like me that come from, I've spent a lot of time in the festival world working with ketamine recreationally. And it's like, oh, it's so easy. But I think people are forgetting how significant these experiences can be. And, how I have heard numerous stories, and I'm sure you have, about even like re-traumatization happening in these spaces, whether it's above ground, underground, legal, not legal, DIY. Hey everyone, just a quick break to remind you that the True Path Entrepreneur Group Mastermind Program is open for enrollment now. We start at the beginning of 2024 in January, but we are starting to take applications now. If you'd like to learn more, you can check out the Mastermind webpage on my site at bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. This is a 12-month group community-oriented mastermind program where you learn how to start, grow, and get clients in your business so that you can help more people, make a difference in the world, and do work that you absolutely love. This mastermind program is designed for new and early stage coaches, healers, psychedelic entrepreneurs, therapists, and anybody who wants to do transformational work in the world and wants to learn the exact steps you need to know to grow your business to the next level, to be able to share your unique medicine and make a difference in the world. So again, that's bethaweinstein.com/mastermind. The True Path Entrepreneur Group Business Coaching Mastermind Program is open now. Let's talk about this a little, about trauma and ethics that's happening in whether, it doesn't really matter if it's like the legal world or not. What are some kind of overarching themes you've heard in your work over the last few years of people like having negative experiences? Is there like a reason why this might happen, or is it just kind of like bad, the wrong substance for them, or too much of something, or a facilitator that wasn't skilled, or wrong set and setting? Like, what do you find the most common, like, kind of, I hate to say it, but like the horror stories that you hear are?
Sure. I mean, things do go wrong. And that is, unfortunately, when you're working, it's like being a therapist, you hear about people's trauma. Being an integration coach, you hear about people's difficult experiences on psychedelics. A lot of what we hear is people having recreational use that goes a direction that they didn't think that it should. That can be traced back to not having the substance that they thought. So, substance testing can be an issue there. It's, part of the underground thing of having illicit substances, and or being at an event and then maybe they took too much, or they didn't weren't ready for the dehydration that goes with being in a situation like that, or maybe they had a lot of recreational use that was positive and then they go to Burning Man and it's a totally different ball game and they over dose themselves. There's definitely this theme that I hear around guides and sitters not being able to provide the care that people need when they have a difficult experience in ceremony. And that's really unfortunate. I think sometimes this even comes up in integration as a secondary piece of somebody's story where they're talking about a difficult experience that they had, and they happen to mention that they were held down, or that their mouth was covered, or that they were told not to scream. And I think that that is, a product of having a lot more ceremonial space in the US, where people are doing ceremony in an apartment, or they're doing ceremony in a house that's too close to other houses. So there's not room for people to naturally have big experiences. Big experiences are very much a part of psychedelics. And, in a harm reduction space, we encourage people to follow that to its end. I think another thing that seems very thematic is this ego inflation that you were talking about earlier, that really can happen where people are, headed into a space of spiritual bypassing, where they're using the substance to kind of be a part of something. They feel really positive. They have really great experiences on psychedelics, but then they come around to Monday and they're not able to manage their lives, and their lives are falling apart. Maybe they fall back into existential crisis. Maybe they have problems with suicidal ideations or other substance abuse to get them through until they go to the next ceremony. So we definitely see that as a theme, where people are using the medicine, or overusing or abusing the medicine, and they don't realize that what's happening during the medicine is what needs to be worked on after the medicine. Integration is the key for so many different types of transpersonal experiences. The reason that we named our company Altered States Integration was because we see all altered states or transpersonal experiences as valid and opportunities for change. You can get hung up on going to yoga festivals just like you can get hung up on going to ceremony. And you can go one weekend and come home and have your, be in the middle of a tragic divorce that you can't handle, and then go back to another yoga festival and it feels all love and light. And then you go home and your world is crashing in. And so I think that that is really something that we see thematically. And I think that we'll continue to see as people come in and think this is a one and done experience, that not everybody's going to have the miracle experience that I was able to have. And in fact, it wasn't my first psychedelic experience. And it was a long journey to put all the pieces together for the medicine to do the work that it did. So I think that that's, if anything, there's a message to our community and to the people coming into our community, is to realize that this is not, anybody that sells you this is a one and done, that they're peddling snake oil. This is, not the 1800s, and you can't just take this elixir and be cured of whatever it is. You still have to do the heavy lifting and the psychological work that goes with it.
Mm. You covered so many important points there. And it's funny because I even hesitate to use certain language. Like, I don't use it, even though I've had these moments that seem miraculous, a little bit, there's certain people or places out there that actually market their psychedelic experiences as like, come get your miracle, or like, we'll fix this, or like, this is magic, and I'm like, well, I don't think they're talking about the reality of coming back to life and integrating. And actually, it's an observation I've made for so long, and I've been talking about a lot lately, is, there's something about like going to ceremonies and the medicine. I know, because I've gone through this myself, that's like, yeah, of course it feels good, and there's a belonging, and this community that maybe isn't even a real community. They're just people coming together to do medicine a lot. And then there's life that happens in between. And what I'm seeing more and more of is people that are just, it's like this constant, like, okay, ceremony this one week, and then life gets back to, normal, and then they feel like crap again. And then next thing you know, it's like hape every day, or, ketamine, or like MDMA. And then there's another ceremony, and then there's another thing, and then another. And it's just like, on, and then they mix in, and I'm like, wow, there are some people I know, even like DMT pens. That's the thing I keep now seeing, is like, people are, and they're, I try to not have this judgment, but I kind of wonder how much of it is actually helping, or if it's just this massive like, like numbing or bypassing. I mean, I don't know. Who am I to say what's right or wrong? But I think it's good to point it out and really mention that the real integration is within life, like was it within this presence of being alive and actually like dealing with what's at hand in your life, and hopefully learning how to manage it better versus just avoiding it with maybe a different medicine. And even the word medicine gets into this like, oh well, if it's a medicine it's okay. It's like you said, yoga festivals. I actually experienced this when I used to run marathons and ultra marathons, that there was, I noticed it one day. I was like, wow, everybody's avoiding life by running, these 50-mile races every weekend, because then all you do is train and you run like, hours and hours a day. And it was just this like weird like mentality that reminded me of drugs, like, abusive relationship, like the addiction. So I'm glad you brought this up, because I think it's really important for people to understand what secondary trauma is, because I've actually heard, I've seen, just kind of being in this ecosystem, a lot of stories about that, where it's like, okay, I wasn't allowed to express, or, I was put into a different room, and, or yes, held, or physically even maybe like held down to the point where you were hurt. And I've seen and heard like numerous stories about people who are actually traumatized by, like, I worked with this one shaman who told me to shut up and didn't want to hear about it. And then I just, went into the downward spiral of self-hate and just made things worse. I don't know how that's helpful. But I want to ask you, just out of my own curiosity, and if you know much about this because of your own experience, about borderline personality, and psychedelics, because this has come up just over the years, in conversation, not so much with people I like my clients, but what are the views on, people with BPD going through psychedelic experiences? Are there like better ones than others, or is it all about the support you have? I've heard people say like you shouldn't even work with someone who has it. What are your views on this?
Yeah, I have some really strong views on this. Let me just put it in as a caveat of something that I said earlier about people being at baseline, is that there has to be some level of emotional baseline where people can manage their lives in order to be able to use psychedelics safely. And I think that that is a really good indication. And it's not always appropriate to be in crisis and then go into a psychedelic space. However, I just want to throw it out there that if people with BPD had ultimately had crises all the time from doing psychedelics, we would already know this from science, because people with BPD tend to have extreme behaviors when they're in like an activated state. And those extreme behaviors are considered risky behaviors, right? Risky sex, fast driving, drug use, right? Including psychedelics. So if psychedelics were so harmful for people with BPD across the board, we would have already had so many hospital admissions from people who are like, they're like, oh, you've already been diagnosed with BPD and you took LSD and look at what happened. And that is really not statistically the case. And I think that we are moving away from that. One of the great talks that I went to at Psychedelic Science was specifically about new research looking at borderline personality disorder and psychedelics. I personally, from my experience, do think that there will be on down the road some connections that they find with using Ibogaine for BPD as part of the addiction cycle, because my book is called Breaking Emotional Addiction, because a lot of what BPD is rumination, either on the future or the past, and being stuck in those cycles of narratives. And that's an addictive cycle. And I think that it really still activates a very similar part of your brain. So if you can have a break from that while you're making changes and have neuroplasticity for up to 40 days with Ibogaine for your half-life of the medicine, then you have a really big opportunity to make some substantial changes. Now, I would love a chance to address kind of me after Ibogaine, because one of the most miraculous things for me, and I keep using that word because for me it really was a miracle. However, the thing that was the most stunning for me was the day after I woke up from Ibogaine, was that my mind was quiet. And that was the rumination. That was the inner voice that was always so loud and so compelling. And so needy and constant, is that that was so much quieter, and there was this lack of pull. So even probably it probably was at least 90 days later before I even had my first SI related thought after that point in time. And I remember just kind of having it and being like, ah, that's not what I want. And like it went away. And that's so much different than what people experience of this nagging, cranking kind of feeling that's very visceral. And I think that that is where Ibogaine will be really important for people as they move forward, is to like have that relief, because um, you know, we don't even know what it's like. Most people who have these mental health problems that they've had since they were children, because these are, secondary trauma, this is complex PTSD, is that there's not even a context of what a normal life looks like. And I think that that is also the struggle that people with addiction come back to, is that we come back to a place and then you're like, well, is this normal? Did I heal? And here's the thing, is that, do I have some of the same tendencies I had before? Yeah. I'm still like, when I'm angry, my voice is still going to be raised. When I'm feeling inconfident, or like that I have some sort of imposter syndrome, which is something that like I still have to deal with as a psychedelic leader. I have to definitely deal with that on a regular basis, is that I still have those thoughts. It's how I deal with them and my ability to deal with them, the ability to walk past something, to say, oh, I had a thought. I don't really like that thought, but I'm not going to keep that thought. That you can, it's that floating down the river that they tell you to experience when you're meditating, that you see the leaf floating by and then it's gone, instead of having that leaf stick to your face and be stuck on there as you're trying to claw it off, which is the experience I think that you have when you have difficulties with mental health.
Wow. It's so incredible. And I'm so glad that we got to talk about this because, I feel like, thank God there's so much more research coming out, but to hear this perspective, because I think there's such a quick to judge in the psychedelic space of like, oh, well, that person has this, don't give them something, or they did that, or they had this one, um, you know, episode 4 years ago. It's like, what other things can we take into account for looking at this holistically for, potential for healing? And I just find this so fascinating because, of course, I've had clients that have dealt with it and worked with psychedelics. And, I've always wondered, like, is this helping or making them worse? And maybe it just depends on the integration and all the therapeutic modalities that they have. And like you said, I'm actually a big believer in, I don't believe that our trauma gets like, healed to this point where it's like never gonna bother us again. I believe it's just more, it gets us to a place of like, oh, I'm functioning so much better than I ever have. Now when something comes up and triggers me, it, floats on by versus, this quest. And I feel like I see this a lot with psychedelics. There's this quest to just like get rid of everything because everybody wants to feel happy all the time. And it's like, well, there's this human experience, and I think it isn't about like not feeling bad or not getting angry or not having episodes. It's more about like getting it into a healthier check to, have a flourishing life. And I always remind people these medicines aren't here to just like fix you and make you into some like perfect, whatever that is, perfect human. I would love to, meet whatever people think is a perfect human. I always say, I'm like, even Mother Teresa wasn't perfect. But I really love hearing about this. Now I'm curious, back when you chose to work with the Iboga, had you already tried to intentionally heal the disorder with other medicines? Like why, I'm just curious, like why the Iboga, other than, trust me, I've been on the verge of doing it for years. I'm like, one of these days I'll get up the nerve, and because of that reason that it's been known to be like this master healer. But is there a reason why it came to Iboga?
Yeah, it definitely was a choice. And I had experimented with, I had already had about 10 years of dialectical behavioral therapy, and it got me very far. So I really do highly recommend people move into that modality. If you're having behavioral and emotional issues, you need those skills. You have to work the skills before the medicine's going to have much room to work. However, when I had experimented with other medicines, like I did some microdosing or mini dosing with LSD. I did some learning Spanish with LSD. Some, uh, yeah, it was. I really recommend doing a film you love in another language. So it's a film like I watched Star Wars several times because I know all the words to
Yeah.
it, and then you watch it in Spanish on a a museum dose of
I know I have a
LSD.
Spanish lesson tonight, literally. I'm going to try that one of these days.
Yeah, yo hablo español ahorita. So something worked a little bit. Um,
It's amazing.
but when it came around to feeling like there was this endless emotion roller coaster that I was on and that I couldn't get off of, I did work a little bit with psilocybin with some intention and some therapeutic benefit. It really helped me unpack things, but it didn't give me, I think, the neurological break that Iboga does. And I think that that's why it's so special. And I think that we'll find that the different psychedelics work for most people in some similar ways in what they do neurologically. And I sought it out for two reasons. One, on a spiritual level, ayahuasca, which I still have never done, is very much about, I feel like, going out into the universe. You meet beings that are outside of yourself. You meet um, the grandmother, right? And that is kind of more of an outward experience. Knowing that I have this childhood trauma and this complex PTSD, I was really attracted to Ibogaine because it was had the life review, right? I had questions about my childhood that I can't remember, and I was like, oh, do I have some specific sexual trauma? Is there things that happened to me that I don't remember, and that's what happened to me? Because I'm actually the way I would see it is my complex PTSD is a product of bullying and a unstable like coping model, right, from my parents. And so that's not like a big T trauma, right? There's not like something that was like a moment in time or several moments in time. And so I was curious about that. So life review was really interesting to me. The second part was that I felt like that from my research that there was more of this grandfather element to iboga, and I've really felt like that is part of my life that's missing. I'm very in a astrological sense, I'm very much Cancer, right? That is my astrological sign. I'm the caretaker, I'm the mother, but I'm also the emotional roller coaster that people expect from that. And so I thought that that was an energetic that I would like to lean into. And then, of course, there is this addiction side of things where my understanding of chemistry and neurochemistry just made me feel like, hey, if I can give myself an opportunity to not be addicted, because I do very much feel like there's this propensity to want and to delve into these negative emotions. It's not just that these negative emotions are happening to you, that at some point, I think with my BPD is that I would thrive in it. It's like, oh, this crushing pain, I'm going to like dig it deeper, right? And so I thought that that was something that really sounded interesting to me. Um, and I think that in a sense of access, it felt more accessible to me as somebody who was going to do a DIY experience than ayahuasca. I don't know that that's now my knowledge base is different, and I don't know that that even means anything anymore. That was just the naivety of of knowledge right there.
Wow. I'm so glad you share this. I really am, because I think so many people maybe wouldn't be up for sharing this out in public, but I actually think this is really important. There's so many people that suffer out there, and not to say people should go do this on their own, but just to get a sense of like the spirit behind it, like you said, like that addictive feeling. Like I've had this so much where it's like I've questioned, I'm like, am I just addicted to some form of suffering? And I think a lot of us are, whether it's like diagnosed as something or not. I say this a lot in clients where it's like I have to work with clients over and over to help them reprogram their inner state of being to feel safe enough to allow things to actually be okay. Not even to be good, but like okay. Like it is okay to receive okayness. It's okay to allow yourself to be taken care of. Just so many of these deep societal problems that I think, that run in so many of us, especially, by the way, I mean, I'm sure you would agree. Women, I work with a lot of people in, the nursing world, caretaking spaces, doulas, end of life care. And there's very often this imbalance, and I've seen what happens after many, many years where there's this struggle or even getting sick or even just like, hey, there's something up and I don't know what it is. And it's like, well, like look at this like history of the pattern and how it runs in the background of your life. So thank you for sharing it, because I think it's so important that people hear our personal stories of how we've healed and how we've worked on this, and that it is this ongoing integration. So Elizabeth, I want to give you a chance to talk about, what you're up to with Alter States, what you're up to personally. I know you're in your coaching school. Like, what's next for you in the next 6 to 12 months?
Oh, so much. I have to say the best part of reaching this level of healing for me is that I have all that time I used to spend being stressed or ruminating about things to work on projects. And so it is pretty amazing. The very next thing for us is heading out to do harm reduction at Burning Man. That's just our annual gift. Super excited to be doing that. And, I think it keeps me fresh in the world of being exposed to psychedelics. Toby and I don't do psychedelic experiences at this point in our organization. In the future, we'd like to have some sort of a legal retreat, but that's the direction that we're heading. For me, I'm finishing up coaching at Lumia, which is really exciting. So hopefully this fall I will be internationally coaching federation accredited or certified to be a coach, which I think is a really great skill, because it's, even as someone who is not necessarily into advice giving, it really has helped me figure out how to bring out the best out of my clients, which I'm really excited to do. This fall, we are doing our fifth or sixth cohort of start to finish integration circle course and leadership workshop, where we are bringing in people to learn about what it means to hold space as a psychedelic leader. So we have people who have started integration circles, we have people who have started psychedelic clubs or societies, and we really want to kind of bring in this lower level entry into the psychedelic field, right? I'm not training you to be a facilitator. I'm not training you to be a coach. Actually, all I'm training you to do is to be a peer, and how to look at ethics. I mean, this is something that we are really leaning into over and over, is like, what is the standard in our field? Like, how can we bring up this standard of how people relate? What is conflict of interest? How are you going to deal with the illegal versus the legal substances that are going to be in our communities? um, and then really kind of delving into what it means to work with difficult people. Because one of the things that I think is a danger in our field is that we have this love and light kind of side perspective that kind of creeps into all of these organizations, and people want to be wholesome, but when people are difficult in their room or in their integration circles or in their clubs, they don't really have the skills to deal with that. And it's really important, because I think that anybody that's coming to this space, I really want to acknowledge that they are coming here for healing. People are coming here because they have problems. Coming here for healing means I have problems and I'm trying to work through them. It doesn't mean that they have the skills to work through them. It doesn't mean that they have the guidance to work through them. And so, as leaders in this space, we have to be ready to be role models and to help people figure out how there's a pathway to making mistakes and then to coming back into community. And so, really, our focus for the next probably 12 months, or even probably the rest of my life, is helping people learn how to build community, setting standards for community, teaching people how to deal with difficult people, right? Talkative Tammy is going to come to your group. She's welcome. But we do need to know how to keep her, within our guidelines. And so that's really what we're looking at, is to kind of focus on those things. personally, I'm hoping in the next 12 months to write more of a nutrition course around psychedelics, thinking about like what kind of herbal medicine is complementary, what isn't, talking about interactions like we talked about earlier, and really giving people an idea of how nutrition and health really play a part in things like, healing from mental health. And, I don't know if you know this, Beth, but they've done some recent studies on people with IBS, IBD, Crohn's, and colitis, and they're finding that better than 90% of people with those diseases can identify like a big T trauma that happened to them earlier on in their life. And so I think that while it doesn't mean you can think your way out of these problems, it does mean that there is this psychosomatic element that we really have to address. And so, a professional goal of mine is to get dietitians a seat at the psychedelic table because, if you're going to a retreat center, you need somebody to teach these elements and to address vitamin deficiencies. People with cravings, craving for food is like a craving for water, is like a craving for alcohol, is like a craving for chromium when you are short. And so, really addressing these things is so important to me, and for us to elevate those conversations.
I am a huge fan of this, by the way, because I I personally just went through something where I was really it was after psychedelic science. I was really low on electrolytes from being sick. I had like this really strange sickness that I think was caused by a spider bite because I found this gigantic spider bite on me. And thankfully, my herbalist, who I work with, who's also like Chinese medicine and, just very well studied, also is a medicine man, who understands interactions and how medicine affects us. But, I actually have been saying this for a long time. I'm like, I don't think a lot of people, or especially even more facilitators, are not aware of how just even simple things in our diet. And there I was going to Peru to work with medicine while also like feeling this kind of imbalance in my body. And thankfully I know my body enough, but I was like, wow, if I hadn't known that and I hadn't had him, I probably would have been just like wrecked or miserable or maybe even sent to the hospital there. And I knew how to deal with it and take care of it and drink certain teas and certain herbs. But I think people forget how much these medicines really affect us, and vice versa. Like you said, traumas connected to chronic symptoms, or even someone I know just said, I have anxiety. What helps? And of course, there's 20,000 comments on this Facebook post. And I was like, well, do you drink caffeine? Like something super simple. Like, let's start with the very basics first, like the diet, even me, like I've noticed over the years, even water intake, if I'm dehydrated, like I'm like in a weird mood. I don't sleep well. I wake up more at night, super simple. So I would love, please let me know when that's out. I think this would be so important for space holders and people who are working with medicines to have these dietary, just kind of like a guide of understanding what they could do or what is an interaction and what works and what doesn't work. So I can't wait for that. And yes, we will have the links right here in the show notes to the Altered Integrations offerings. I know you guys have these amazing trainings for integration circles. And I said, I'm going to start sending clients to your trainings because, yeah, I don't know anyone else who's actually teaching people how to create these communities. And I do believe in this is like, we have to be healing in community. This is the whole point. We can't do this by ourselves. The integration process is not a solo experience. It's a human relation. It's like we are part of the earth and part of each other. And we need to be able to, relate and not shut people out or kick people out of circles or cancel people because they're totally different than you. It's like, this is the human experience. So I'm so glad you guys are teaching this and standing for this. And thank you so much for the harm reduction work you do. So
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. We're just out here trying to create something different because we can't create something different by following the old ways, and we have to come up with new ways of being. If we follow the old corporate models or the standard American way of being, then we're going to get the same results. So we're really out here trying to figure out to do something different. And we love collaboration. So, it's really exciting being on your podcast, and then for other people that are seeking us out to, we don't know the answer, but we're here having a conversation, because that's what, ethics is. That's what the future is. It's about creating a conversation where we can be open and change our minds and discuss what's possible. Because if we don't, then none of it's possible.
Aw. So good to have you on. Everybody will have our links right here. Be sure to check out Altered States Integration. Thank you so much for your time, Elizabeth. It was so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Beth. You have a good afternoon.